Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillahi wa kafa, wassalatu wassalamu ala man la nabiyya ba'da wa ba'd. Alhamdulillah, we've come so far because today we're looking at the interim period after the demise of the Abbasid governance, the Seljuks, and the rise of the Ottomans. We're looking at a time period of 662 to 762. The interim period, the Seljuks and the rise of the Ottomans, is from 656 to 699, that particular area. But we're going to go further because obviously we're covering a century at a time. We need to keep a short recap of what's happened so far with regard to the governance. We ended on a low point the last session because we had the judiciary exterminated and the Khulafa, figureheads that they were, some of them being oppressive as they were, exterminated. Baghdad destroyed, the river Euphrates running black for 9 months with the ink of all the books thrown into it. Let me say as a beginning point, there were scholars who split into two camps regarding the devastation that happened. There were those who stayed behind and fought the Tatars until they died. They just fought them. With everything they had, they fought the Tatars. Fought until they died. Some, in the aftermath of the devastation, when they saw that the books and the knowledge were being annihilated, memorized heavily and took whatever written material was left over and came to Damascus. If you look at the amount of written literature that was destroyed and what was taken to Damascus, you will find that 85% of the knowledge was kept and restored from Baghdad to Damascus, just in the heads and hearts of people. The remaining 15% was quoted in other commentary literature by those scholars. So although we may have lost those books in their physical form, they weren't lost completely because they're quoted in other works and commentaries. So the ulama, again, saved the knowledge. Through their memory, saved the knowledge. You have books, for example, during one of the massacres of the Franks, or the Franj in Andalus, Taj-ul-Urus was one of the works that came under attack. And so what happened is one of the ulama took Taj-ul-Urus and was flipping through it and memorized it by the time the rest of Andalus fell. Took it to Iraq and recited it from memory and had it written down. There were very few mistakes other than diacritical markings, like instead of duriba, daraba, and things like this. But it was by and large preserved because, again, the ulama protected this religion. And I cannot stress it enough to you that the people that have been in charge of this religion, as the Prophet ﷺ said, the scholars are the inheritors of the prophets. They protected this religion by their memory, by their sacrifice, and their dying. Now, from the years 656 to 660 AH, after the slaughter of the Abbasid rulers by the Mongols, or the Tatars is their more common historical name because there were a particular brand of them called Tatars. There were no Khalifahs, Abbasid or otherwise. There was no Khilafah. From 656 to 660, there was no Khilafah. I want this point mainly mentioned because we have some groups in our midst that insist that there either has always been this unbroken Khilafah in our midst and that it's fard on every Muslim to work for it, and that it's a big sin if it's left for just a second. Think carefully. The ulama are the inheritors of the prophets, the safeguard of this ummah. do we really believe if it was fard ayn on the whole ummah to have khilafah that it would have been left for 4 years? What's important, Surah Ash-Shura, the 42nd Surah, Ayah 13, Aqimud Deen, establish the deen. Establishing the Sharia is a mainstay. As for khilafah or imara or the different means of implementing it, that's a different matter altogether. And the khilafah, as we've spoken on already, is the sole providence of the ulama to establish. So for 4 years there was no khilafah. What were the ulama doing? Fighting in wars against the Tatars, calling people to make tawbah, fighting against other forces and enemies. That's what they were doing. And governing the ummah as they had been before. What difference was there to the ulama for these figureheads that are now gone as opposed to when they're there? Nothing. Is the zakah still being established? Yes. Jum'ahs are still happening? Yes. Armies are still being dispatched? Of course. So what's changed? Well, what's changed is the general makeup of how the top-down government worked, with a righteous Khalifa in charge, in which that person was a scholar or taking from the scholars. There would be a go-between. But with that, the ulama picked up the rest of the slack in the absence of the Khalifa and his deputies. And they continued to distribute zakah and do everything else as they had been normally. What remained of the earthly rulers were amirs, walis, sultans who had their armies, governors, and trucial states. The bay'ah of the people and loyalty still resided with the scholars as per the time of the Qadi Abu Ya'la the Elder. With the vicious murder of Imam Yahya al-Sarsari, the judiciary was devastated. The scholars that stayed and fought, some were martyred, while others lived to take away some of the knowledge to the next closest center of influence, Damascus, which is in the country of Sham. As of 660 AH, the Abbasids were back in power, but in Egypt, and they were only figureheads. Now this part is also important. So the Abbasids, if we remembered before, when they defeated and crushed the Fatimiyah, what did Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi did? He interrupted the Fatimi khutbah, came in, interrupted the majlis, interrupted the khutbah, actually took the imam down from the mimbar, and then completely revamped Al-Azhar. So Al-Azhar, which was originally built as a Shia, Ismaili, as well as Ithna Ashari institution, was made Sunni only 900 years ago, 800 years ago. It has not been Sunni that long. And now it's headed back towards that Shia direction because they've gained a lot of control over the faculty. Now, in looking at this situation, Damascus became the next center. Originally, when Baghdad was known as Qubbatul Islam, the Dome of Islam, or Madinatul Salam, the city of peace, people would have after the name Al-Baghdadi, Al-Iraqi. That's how you could tell people were proud to have that because they'd either lived there or they were from there. Now there's a shift in which now you start to see after people's name Al-Dimashqi, Al-Ba'labaki, Al-Ba'ali, right? Al-Bayruti, right? From Beirut, from Ba'labak al-Ba'ali. Al-Dimashqi, from Damascus. Al-Dumani, from Duma. They start to have Al-Ruhaybani, from Ruhayba. They start to have these titles that now, because the balance of culture had shifted to Sham, and then to a lesser extent to Egypt, in which people now had Al-Masri or Al-Misri, people say it different ways. They had this now after their names. So you had major Maliki ulama from North Africa bearing Al-Misri after their name. Major Hanafi scholars bearing Al-Misri. In fact, that became the seat of Hanafi learning. Many of the major scholars that are the backbone of the Hanafi school in terms of authoritative fatwa, like Ibn Abidin, are either Shamis or they're Egyptians. Badruddin al-Aini is an Egyptian. Qutlubagha is an Egyptian. All these different figures were either Egyptians or Shamis in the recent history because of the level of knowledge and the endeavors that they put into it, the commentary literature. The Hanafi school matured to a deeper level in Egypt and in Sham. And that's why when you look at, if you look at the curriculum between, say, Pakistan and India, and their studies and the studies of, say, the 16 and 1500s in Sham and Egypt, there's a marked difference, not because one's inferior, but just because of the emphasis upon the learning of the knowledge and perfecting of it. There were different means that the Hanafis that were Arabs had to the Hanafis that were coming from India and Pakistan. And the Central Asians, if we're talking Afghanistan over into the Central Asian republics, they had an edge over everyone because they memorized everything. So you had a Muslim brother, and I'd mentioned this I think before, who was a dear colleague of mine. He came here from Afghanistan, and he was surprised that adults here and in some other institutions were studying Nur al-Idah. He said, because we memorized that book when we were in elementary education. We memorized that. In Jalalabad and Herat, we memorized that book. He says, so I find it very strange that adults are, poring over this book and putting so much of their time and energy into it. We memorized this, and we memorized these other books. He says, it's so strange to us. That shows the emphasis that they have on knowledge. And again, it goes way back to Imam Abu Mansur al-Maturidi, who preserved the madhab, Abu Hafs al-Nasafi, who's another Central Asian Hanafi, Samarqandis, these type of people. You cannot get around the Hanafi school. You cannot study it in any real depth without dealing with the ulama of Samarkand or Central Asia and Afghanistan. You have to deal with those ulama. You just can't get around it. You must deal with those ulama. And that's one of the reasons why. Now in 659, in the month of Muharram, the Mamluks of Egypt, which included Baybars, Qutus, and Qalawun, moved against the Tatars with great fury and defeated them at the Battle of Anjalut, a location in Sham in which only one Muslim died. Now this Battle of Anjalut, the Muslims were outnumbered. By some historical accounts say 10, some say 30 to 1 odds. The Mongols or the Tatars were undefeated so far. They'd rolled over every civilization that they'd ever encountered. They came down from the Central Asian steppes and they killed 42 million Chinese people in 10 years. I'll say that again. They killed 42 million Chinese people in 10 years. The Chinese returned the favor to the Muslims from 39 to 49 by killing 40 million of us, which still isn't covered in any archives, and they don't talk about it. Inshallah, we will. But they killed 42 million Muslims, 42 million Chinese, coming down from the Central Asian steppes. Then they moved further, and the army passed by Afghanistan. It didn't go fully into Afghanistan. It passed by. They passed by Vietnam and Cambodia and thought that there was no one living there because they had tunneled under their country and were preparing for trench warfare with the Mongols, which the Mongols didn't know about and passed by. That same warfare would be used in the Vietnam War against the Americans. And so the Vietnamese and Cambodians were very adept at using extraordinary tactics to win wars. The Cham Muslim Empire at that time, which was in Cambodia and Cham, they were called Cham or Sham Muslims. They were the Malays that had paddled over from Malaysia and Indonesia into Cambodia and Vietnam and built a small sultana in that area, mostly Shafi'is. They're Shafi'is in fiqh. They were affected by the Mongols, but only slightly. The Mongols rolled over Baghdad, as we obviously covered, and they rolled over areas in the former empire of Iran. So everywhere they went, the people either hid, they were rolled over and incorporated, or devastated. As a quick explanation, the Tatars, their religion was shamanism, which is the belief in ancestor and spirit worship. Festivals tend to center around the worship of ancestors. If anyone's ever seen, an example of shamanism would be if you've ever seen the Japanese festival of Obun, where they leave food out for their ancestors once a year. And they come and they worship their ancestors and ask them to forgive them and to bring them good luck. This is shamanism. That is the very essence of shamanism. It's different to animism slightly, but that is shamanism. the use of incantations to remove spirits and devils. And the Tatars, some of them feigned Islam, Judaism, or Christianity, but they would always syncretize. And syncretism is where you make a collage of different religions into one religion. And by doing that, they created sort of this amalgam. And so a Tatar, he would tell you, if you asked him, what religion are you? He'd say he was Christian. But you would not be able to tell the difference between his worship, his actions, his character, and someone practicing pure shamanism. Because he didn't see that there was any contradiction between the shamanism that he practiced and Christianity. They wrote out a book of laws, which inshallah we'll be covering next week, called al-Yasiq, which supposedly in their language is supposed to mean the Constitution, and bears a striking resemblance to the U.S. Constitution, which obviously we'll talk about later. But the Mongols, or the Tatars, brought with them, as you'd see, empires that they took over. They would kidnap or incorporate or engulf people, and you'd see the Tatars, and there'd be people praying Salah, and then other people would be burning incense, and then some people would be facing the place of direction for Jews in prayer. Some people would be burning incense as Buddhists, and there'd be all these other things going on, and they'd all be prisoners within this huge Tatar army, because they just upheld all of this. And so it was a strange sight when people would look at the army of the Tatars, because they carried their prisoners everywhere with them. And so you'd have an army of 200,000, and maybe 50,000 of those were prisoners, because they carried all their people with them, their food, their prisoners. And obviously as they spread from one area to another, the army got bigger and bigger and bigger. Now before Baybars' time, they used to send letters to individual rulers and say, in the letter, they would usually say something intimidating, like, we are the Tatars and our ruler is Genghis Khan. We devour civilizations. Our horses have necklaces of skulls of your kindred loved ones just north of you, or wherever direction that they were from you. And they did. They used to have ears as necklaces, and they would have skulls that they put around the necks of their camels or their horses, and their armor. They would use human pelts, and they would tan human pelts as leather and use that for the armor for their horses. And so someone writes you a letter like that and says, you can either surrender and live in fear but safety, or try to fight and meet the same fate. And that the letter would just cut off. And obviously they would send out their scouts and everyone to go and surrender and capitulate. And if the Tatars felt that was necessary, they would accept their capitulation. If not, they'd devastate the township. Sometimes they wouldn't keep to the precepts that they espoused in their letter. They made a mistake, though, when they sent a letter to Baybars, because they sent a similar letter that we are the wreckers of civilization. We are those who make mothers bereaved of their children. We annihilate every enemy that we find. And the letter cut off abruptly. And Baybars and some of his generals had them send a letter back to say, let us introduce ourselves to you. We are the humiliators of innovation, the destroyers of kufr, those who send those who reject faith to a fire that will last for all eternity, where the wrath of Allah shall abide. Prepare to meet your doom. And the letter just cut off. And that was the Muslim response to the Tatars. Now, you have to remember, the Muslims, they were in a really tight situation. The Crusaders, or the French, were still in North Africa and in Andalus. And they had coming from the east. So you have a Western empire and an Eastern empire that are both pressing on the Muslim world. As they were pressing on the Muslim world and applying all this pressure, the issue that was in everyone's mind was, what are they going to do? And so on Friday, on Jum'ah, the Mamluks roused the people and said, we will march out and we shall return. And when we return, we shall return the same as how we left if Allah wills. Only we shall return victorious. And so huge amounts of people signed up for battle with them. They marched out and they were victorious. And it was one of the most decisive and one of the most mismatched wars of history, where you had an enemy that was between 15 and 30 times the underdog, and he still lost. Unprecedented. The only example we probably have of that in modern times was the recently deceased Soviet Union and the dying Americans in Afghanistan. Both of them meeting an icy fate in the graveyard of the armies in Afghanistan. Or the fate the Americans met with the Vietnamese. Massive army, huge resources, a smaller enemy, but more determined and able-bodied and agile. So Baybars, Qutuz, and Qalawun defeated them at Anjalut, and only one Muslim died in that war. Only one. Huge numbers. Some accounts put 50,000, some put 30,000 Tatars were killed in that war, and one Muslim died. So it's not about weapons. It's about Iman and how determined that you are. Later that year in Rajab, Al-Mustansir Billah, the son of Al-Zahir, the first Abbasid Khalifa of Egypt, was given the oath of allegiance. He had no real power and readily admitted that Baybars was truly the ruler of Egypt. Before becoming Khalifa, he had sought to take up residence and normalize Abbasid power in Baghdad, but was quickly jailed by the Tatars. He sought help from the Arabs of Egypt, who had him released, and he came to Egypt. When he entered, the people were glad to see him, and he returned and he came in from an-Nasr gate, and his lineage was recited to the people. Because you must remember the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ in the Sahih of Imam Muslim, Al-Khilafatu fi Quraysh. The Khilafah is in Quraysh. It is a condition for any Khalifa that he be from Quraysh. So this is why it was so significant that he recited his lineage, and that it was recited by the others so they could trace him back and say, this person is definitely related. He is from the Quraysh, he is from the family of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And further from there, those who gave him the oath of allegiance were al-Qadi, Tajuddin ibn Bint al-Az, Baybars, and al-Izz ibn Abdul Salam. He was the 38th Abbasid Khalifa in general. So he was the first one in Egypt of the Abbasids, but he was the 38th Abbasid Khalifa. The 37th was killed by the Tatars, as we remember. Al-Izz ibn Abdul Salam. Why is he important? He is important because he was one of the great Shafi'i ulama of his time. He wrote numerous books on theology. He wrote a tafsir, which is one slim volume, and a number of manuals in fiqh, and he was one of the heads of the judiciary. He also would make it his business to speak against leadership if he thought it was either oppressive or if it was unuseful to the people that were under it. And people used to come to him and say that he was being too harsh, to which his reply would be, it is our job to uphold the justice of Allah's religion so that the people may be safe from tyranny. And so he always spoke out. He always, even when he wasn't asked to, he always spoke truthfully. Al-Izz ibn Abdul Salam is also known because in the early part of his career, he got into, because he was an Ash'ari, he got into a huge discussion with Hanbalis over a number of topics. And it soured relations for a number of years because one of the things that he'd been told is do not bring up these ancillary issues because they're going to divide people. Stay quiet about these things. Don't discuss these matters because you're going to divide people. And we see it now where it happens, where people will be speaking on a platform and someone will start to be cross-examined over some ancillary issue. What do you say about Mawlid? What do you say about this? And it will be some ancillary issue. And they will build that ancillary issue as a basis of whether or not to pray behind the person, to work with them, to be on good terms with them, and it will cause divisions. And so for 3 to 5 years, there were these divisions that had to be ironed out because of the situation between Al-Izz ibn Abd al-Salam and some of the other ulama. In 660 AH, the Tatars took Mosul after they committed a really bad act of treachery. They told the people that they would have safety, and the generals that were coming to see them for an armistice, that they'll have safety. When they arrived, they butchered them. They decimated them and took over, which is not a problem if you look in the text of Al-Yasiq. The same text of Al-Yasiq, which gives them the permission to be treacherous, also says that if someone throws food to someone else in order for them to catch it, the person that threw the food should be killed because they should have more respect for food. But in the same document, they allow you to commit treachery against other people, which is strange, but that is Al-Yasiq. In 661 AH, a meeting was convened with the scholars of Muslim Orthodoxy, and the great-grandson of Al-Mustarshid Billah was declared the 39th Caliph of the Abbasid government in Egypt. His name was Abu al-Abbas al-Hakim bi-Amrillah al-Abbasi. He ruled for 40 years. One of the first to give the oath of allegiance was al-Zahir Baybars al-Bunduqari. Baybars decided to take Sham over in this year and use it as a buffer zone to the Mongols and launch attacks on them from cities near Damascus. It proved effective, and the head of the Mongols at the time, Hulagu Khan, was defeated. He was often called the Great Khan. Generally, when people took over in battles from the Tatars, the ruler over the Tatars would be called the Great Khan. And Khan is, in Arabic, is usually, it has two meanings. One of the meanings of Khan in Arabic means treacherous. That's one of the meanings of the word Khan in Arabic. It means treacherous, to be a traitor. Like a Kha'in is a cheater, a treacherous person, someone that's untrustworthy. But another meaning of Khan in Arabic is when you have someone who is a head over a troop of 6 or more people. That person is also a Khan. And so the second meaning was used for Hulagu or Hulugu Khan, which is that he was the head over that troop of 6 or more people because he was the head over the Tatar army. Now, Baybars gave the oath of allegiance to this second Khalifa who took over after the first one died in 661 AH. Baybars was using the areas of Sham as a buffer. So he went out and just began taking sections of it over, not speaking to the Khalifa, taking advice for him, because the Mamluks, most of them, by the time a Mamluk had been, say, from 9 years old up until his 20s, he will have memorized part or all of some 15 or 16 books on fiqh, creed, tafsir. He would memorize the Qur'an, war. So these people were scholars in their own right and weren't looking to give permission or ask permission or take permission from a Khalifa who was a figurehead. Baybar said on one occasion, when he was asked about the Abbasid Khalifas who he respected, he said, I saw them at times as nothing more than men who we used to take from dinner party to dinner party, and they would enjoy themselves. Meaning that they had no real power other than some of the barakah that they had. Oh, they're related to the Prophet ﷺ, and that's all they had. They couldn't draw up armies. They couldn't dispatch battalions. They didn't have any strength. They couldn't send out warships. They had no power. The real people were the Mamluks, and they were the ones that had the power. In 662 AH, there was a famine that was so bad in Egypt that the price of bread went up almost 50-fold. So the famine that spread in Egypt, and Egypt is generally known as the breadbasket of North Africa. Bread and rice are the two staples that Egypt is known. It's the breadbasket. And now today, Egypt is suffering from the same situation where there are massive bread lines. Why? Improper crop rotation, bad spreading of wealth, squandering of natural resources and wealth, and just general tyranny. And because of all these things, the common people suffer. Now a dead child was brought to Baybars one day bearing 2 heads, 4 eyes, 4 arms, and 4 legs. He did not know what to do about the situation. This again is a further example of birth defects that started to occur among the Muslims. In the 1990s, you will be interested to know that to this day, Muslims are the only people to have successfully, with their doctors, been able to separate cephalic twins, and they've lived. Cephalic twins are usually twins where they're born with their bodies conjoined, the heads conjoined. One is parasitic and lives off the other. They're separate, 2 separate creatures, but for some reason they are fused together. The Muslims are the only ones to this date that have been able to separate cephalic twins, and they live. The Americans haven't been able to do it. The English people haven't been able to do it. The Germans haven't been able to do it. The French haven't been able to do it. All these people who would class themselves as, or would have us believe they were the master race, have been unable to do something that for all intents and purposes, as per the greatness that they espouse for their civilization, all intents and purposes, they've not been able to do it. And the Muslims who right now are in some of our most difficult trials and tribulations are doing these. We are leading the world in cephalic and parasitic twin separation right now. Muslims are leading the world in vitro and artificial insemination technology. The Gulf is giving the Americans an absolute shellacking in terms of this type of study. They're giving them an actual beating because of the fact that the fiqh and the knowledge that people have out there has pushed them and spurred them to creativity. So this was used by some of these ulama as a case study. So the fact that the ulama would say, the fact that Baybars didn't know what to do means that he wanted to do something, but didn't know what to do because he'd never ran across a situation. So the ulama used this as a basis to say, we've got to do something about these conjoined or cephalic or parasitic twins. We've got to try to do something, either by separating them or doing other things, and just by separating the nerves of these small children, dividing up the different cables that make up the veins and the arteries and everything else is hours long. One of the cephalic twins in Egypt, it was a 27-hour operation, just the separation. Never mind closing up the wounds. It's 27 hours to separate them. 4 doctors. 4. And that's fiqh. Because they were combining the salahs the whole time. They had to. It's a 27-hour operation. And only fiqh gives you that type of wisdom, that type of knowledge. Only fiqh gives you that attention to detail, where you're able to prioritize things and to perfect matters and to get to the bottom of things. And so because of that, that cephalic twin that had been separated, the first one died a few months after the operation. The second one lived till 5 years of age and died of a brain infection. But the Americans are 0-0. They've never been able to separate one and have it survive. They are 0-0, bottom line. How many incubator births do Americans and English people have to survive? Few. This is something that our people have been dealing with for all these years. We have no reason to look down on ourselves, not technologically, because we're taking lemons and making lemonade. We have the least resources in terms of having them readily available, and we're pulling off the most amazing feats. 663AH. Al-Funush and Ibn al-Ahmar and Andalus had just engaged in another huge war that would decide the future of the entire peninsula and would later become Spain. Ibn al-Ahmar was victorious, but only after the loss of 40,000 Muslim lives. The Tatars continued to absorb sections of area around Sham and outlying provinces. So all this is going on where you have a sweep of Franj coming down and trying to establish a foothold there, and then coming down in a pincing movement and trying to keep a foothold in Sham. So Sham is there in the east, in the west is Andalus, and the Tatars are coming down from the north, sweeping down. So you have two external enemies. And people say that Hitler's mistake was fighting a two-front war. We will show you, inshallah, as history goes on, that Muslims have fought 2- and 4-front wars and won for years, because Muslims are an inventive people. Now we look at the years from 664 to 676. Hulugu Khan, head of the Tatar and Mughal armies, he died in 665 AH. He left behind 17 sons. His successor was Abgha. He read numerous books but kept his shamanistic beliefs. The Great Khan, as he was called, was the son of Genghis Khan. Baybars swept in and took Jaffa in the year 666 AH and began to consolidate his own governorate. He would find himself later falling out with Imam Nawawi, who on account of him and his policies refused to eat the oranges of Damascus. The Imam believed that the method of the conquest of Baybars had been unjust, and so the food from the trees would count as stolen and thus not valid to eat. So Imam Nawawi, rahimahullah, Imam Yahya Nawawi, the one who wrote the 40 hadith, had personal issues with Baybars regarding the policies that he implemented, and because of this, Imam Nawawi's fatwa on the oranges of Damascus was don't eat them, and I don't eat them. And that's principled because Damascus at that time was known for its oranges. They were quite large, they were luscious, and he said, don't eat them, I don't eat them. And they said, well, then what shall we do? And he said, to eat any other fruit, but do not eat these. Because Baybars was sometimes called al-Malik al-Zahir, the victorious and manifest king, in which what Imam Nawawi would do is he would alter the ra to become a lamb, so it read al-Malik al-Zalim, the oppressing king. And he would know that it was Imam Nawawi doing that. When it would be altered in a letter or in any correspondence, he would arc the ra slightly so it looked like a lamb, al-Malik al-Zalim, the oppressing king. And it started a little trend to where other ulama would start doing it as well. And so then it became difficult to trace exactly who was responsible for this. But the trendsetter was Imam Nawawi, rahimahullah. And he was responsible for this, and they began to have a lot of fallings out over this issue. At the year 667 AH, 200 boats, some accounts say more, were destroyed by strong gale force winds, and many people died. In the year 668 AH, Baybars stormed the last of the Ismaili Hashishiyun castles and took their leader Najmuddin Hassan ibn al-Sha'rani as a criminal. He took him as a prisoner. Now, as a recap very quickly over the Ismaili Hashishiyun, these were the people that tried to assassinate Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi. They tried to assassinate Imam Muwafiquddin ibn Qudama. They tried to assassinate other people. They tried to kill the famous European explorer Marco Polo, who was on the way bringing noodles from China, which was still ethnic food to English people. They'd never seen noodles or macaroni or spaghetti and these other things. He was bringing them back from China and was nearly killed. But he was given safe passage. After surviving the assassination attempt, he was given safety. I'll mention Hassan al-Sabah very quickly. Again, he was the founder of the Hashishiyun. He gave them hashish to smoke in a large dose, and they would pass out, any follower that wanted to join their group. He would then have the body transported to his mounted fortress near a gardened area, in which there would be women and lovely meadows and rivers and lakes, and he would allow them to do whatever they wanted to do for a week. And then after that time, someone would come and drug that person again with hashish or what have you and take them out, and they would be carried down from the layer back to Hassan al-Sabah, who would say, you had been transported by my command to Al-Jannah, the paradise. If you want to go back there, You must do everything I tell you to do. And so you find people who were fervently dedicated, murderous, who would do anything as long as Hassan al-Sabah said, I will one day let you go back. Because they wanted anything to be able to experience what they felt were the delights of the paradise. Baybars brought this cult, who had allied itself with the Crusaders, because they knew their fortunes were few, they were small people. So he brought this cult to an end by storming the last of their castles. I also want to mention something very briefly as well. One of the reasons why the Mongols were able to, or the Tatars were able to sneak up and sack Baghdad with such swiftness, with very little response, is because one of the Shia theologians in Baghdad went out to meet them and told them of the fortifications that they would encounter and what type of resistance that the Sunnis would offer. It's for this reason you have to understand the problem between Sunni and Shia, or the Sunnis and the cults, is not just a problem of you say potato and I say potato. It's a fundamental theological problem. If you will allow a people to come and annihilate an entire judiciary, irrespective of what you think of them, then you have more than just a mere problem of raising hands and not raising hands. You have an issue that is theological, because you do not believe the people that you're dealing with deserve any treatment of as human beings whatsoever. The Tatars in this time destroyed and finished devastating the areas around and including Harran in the year 670 AH. Harran was a very important center of Muslim knowledge, because more than 50 great ulama down the ages came from Harran. You'll usually know this where the alim at the end of his name will have al-Harrani, the one from Harran, right? You have Tajuddin ibn Taymiyyah al-Harrani, Ibn Hamdan al-Harrani, right? All these different people are coming from Harran. The town was left in ruins, with few left to defend it. After numerous battles with the Tatars, and battles that left his body scarred with different wounds, Baybars al-Malik al-Zahir breathed his last in 676 AH. In the aftermath of his death, there was a huge amount of disorder, because Baybars had charisma, he had charm, he had the ability to gather people around himself, to reconcile people. And so when he died, you very rarely meet a leader who has power, charisma, and the ability to unite people. You very rarely find that all in one person. You'll sometimes find charisma, but he doesn't have any power to do anything about it. Or you find power and charisma, but he doesn't unite people, and he's divisive. Or you find power and he unites people, but he's a beast, and he murders and he slaughters and he does all these things. So to find those three attributes in one person that's a leader is very rare. And Baybars was one of those examples. Some people circulated the rumor that he'd been poisoned, but that has not been borne out by any serious historical examination. There have only been one or two sources that have alleged that, and they're much later in the biographical accounts. This was the same Baybars who fought a two-front war, one against the Tatars, as we've already discussed, but also he fought and stopped the Seventh Crusade from one of the kings of the Franch, Louis IX. And he showed that the Christians had lost their resolve. And by breaking the Crusader force with the repeat action rifles that had been invented years before, with the armies that he had, with the strength that he had, he began to get closer and closer to taking down the Crusader castles. because there were still a few that were dotting the landscape. Baybars famously, and when he conquered the last of the Crusader castles, he found that one of them was empty and the ruler was missing. He said, where is the ruler of this domain, this area? He's not here, he's away in residence on holiday. And he had a letter sent to him, a letter pinned out and sent to him. It said, we had come, we had conquered, and you were absent. But for your benefit, we shall describe to you what you would have seen had you been here. Had you been here, you would have seen your army decimated, your soldiers beheaded. Had you been here, you would have seen, and he went into this long 7-page explanation of what he would have said, what he would have seen had he come back. And he said, our sincere advice to you, if you would like to see these events firsthand, is to return to your castle. But if you would prefer to hear about it only by word of mouth and writing, it is best for you to remain where you are on permanent holiday. And obviously that ruler didn't return because he wanted to not witness those events firsthand. Now we have deaths during this time. Deaths during this time. You have Abu Mu'ali al-Zabidi, who was a great Shafi'i scholar, and he taught using the methods that had been handed down by Imam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, rahimahullah. He died in 656. Now, when Imam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, rahimahullah, when he died in 505 AH, the Shafi'i scholars around him sought to synthesize the means of what he had written and to be able to teach it in a systematic pattern. So you'll find the scholars that will be in Yemen or Indonesia or places like that, they'll have this Ghazali curriculum where they will go through either the whole of Ihya Ulumuddin or they'll take sections of it and really concentrate on those sections. And this is sort of this Ghazali worldview of making people that share attributes of Imam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali. And that will be how people use Imam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali's books from the big Shafi'i ulama. This is what they tend to do. So he was one of the ones that used his methods. Another was Zakiyuddin Abu Muhammad al-Mundhiri. He's the writer of At-Targhib wa Tarhib. This is a famous hadith book. At-Targhib wa Tarhib includes a hadith within it. Targhib means to give people encouragement and to spur them on. And that tends to have a hadith about good things. Being good to your parents, the virtues of the paradise, the virtues of good manners, the benefits of the paradise, the beauties and what you're going to see in the paradise. Tarhib means to warn people against or to put fear into people. Right? It's the same place where we get our word irhab, which is to put fear and put terror in people. Irhab. That has to do with a hadith that have to do with warnings about judgment, impending punishment, Allah's wrath, Allah's justice, Allah's might, Allah's power, Allah's judging, right? Allah being the judge of judges, the king of all kings, the one who solves all disputes, the one who punishes, the one who gathers the hypocrites and the unbelievers in the fire for all eternity, where his wrath shall abide forever, right? These things are tarhib. And he gathered that under one heading as a book that can be taught in seminary. First of all, the sciences of ahadith are in that book. And then secondly, there are points to memorize of creed, manners, morals, fiqh, other things like that. So he was a genius in doing that. You have Abu al-Hasan Ali ibn Abdullah ibn Abdul Hamid al-Maghribi. He is known as Abu al-Hasan al-Shadhili, the teacher of those today who claim a Shadhiliya, this tariqah. Abu al-Hasan al-Shadhili is coming from al-Maghrib, this Moroccan area, this horned area of Africa. His methodology was one of sobriety, Abu al-Hasan al-Shadhili. His methodology was one of sobriety, contemplation, fikr wa dhikr. That means contemplating and dhikr. Fikr wa dhikr. This was his way. And some people saw that his way was so strenuous they used to get worried for common Muslims that might try to follow him, because they thought his way really is better for a student of knowledge or a scholar. But for a common man to try to take that, it could harm their deen because some people are weaker than others. But other ulama said, no, leave him, because there will be some common Muslims strong enough to bear what he's teaching. And obviously, Allah will guide those to him who are meant to be guided, and those who are not, Allah will protect them. So there was some dispute, not about whether Abu al-Hasan al-Shadhili was upon Muslim orthodoxy or not, but whether or not they should advise people towards him. So people would come and say, what do you say about Imam Abu al-Hasan al-Shadhili? They'd say, he's a good man. Should I study with him? They'd say, no, not you. Not you. Not that you shouldn't study with him, but not you, because you're not ready. And then others would come and they say, yes, you. Because you have different ulama that are different capacities that some people can't deal with. For example, everyone can take from Imam Nawawi's al-Arba'in an-Nawawiyah. Everyone can take from that. It's a book on hadith. He's made it very easy. He's the people's imam. Everyone can take from that. But some people have to be told, don't study from Imam al-Tufi. He's a great scholar of usul al-fiqh, everything else, but they'll tell you, don't study from Imam al-Tufi. Why? Because he's not a scholar? No. Imam Najmuddin al-Tufi is a great alim, but you're not ready for him. You don't understand the usul that he's going to come with. He is called the genius of usuli scholars. He's on such a different level. You'll find out of 10 people that study him, only 3 people understand him. 3 people will understand him because they try to study him by themselves and they don't understand him in his full capacity as who he is. So when they try to study him, out of 10 people, only 2 or 3 will really see, I know where he's going. I understand where Imam al-Tufi rahimahullah is going. And you'll find people will tend to quote him in English for, say, lax fatwa on certain issues. But they don't realize the areas that they think are lax in, he's actually strict, but they haven't looked at his whole usuli premise that undergirds it. And because of that, they misunderstand, they nullify their wudu, or they nullify their salah, which in turn, if they keep rebelling, they could nullify their shahada because they don't pay attention to these usuli people. Certain people, no matter what you take from Imam ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, no dispute about him. Take from anything you like. But then some ulama, you have to be careful, not because they're deviated, because they're at another level of knowledge. Imam Mahfuz al-Kalbadani, I mean, subhanallah, it could take 8 pages just to give commentary on, say, a couple of lines from his book Al-Hidayah. Because he's someone, he was giving fatwa in all 4 schools. He's just at that level. You have to be careful because you could lead yourself astray. And that's why you have to look at these ulama carefully. So Abu al-Hasan al-Shadhili is one example. He's someone that certain people don't introduce him to. You know that so-and-so's got problems with this, he's got problems with that, he's kind of lazy about his salah. If you try to introduce someone strong like that into the equation, yes, and he used to do this, and he used to do that, they'll say, it's impossible to practice Islam. I might as well just go back to raving and doing what I was doing because Islam is impossible to do. Because they'll look at him as an example and say, I can't do this. Islam is just impossible. But other people that are strong, you introduce him. And they say, subhanallah, that's where I need to be. That's what I'm going to do. And they start building up and getting stronger. You have to be careful, though. And so you have to be careful sometimes which ulama you introduce people to. You then have Shu'la, Abu Abdullah, Muhammad ibn Ahmad ibn Muhammad ibn al-Husayn al-Mawsili, who wrote the famous commentary on the Shatibiyah. You have Abu al-Muhassin, Yusuf ibn al-Jawzi, who was the judge who took the Khilafah of the Tariqat al-Qadiriyah from Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, and he was killed with 3 of his sons by the Tatars in 656 AH. So all the people that I mentioned. So this Imam Abu al-Muhassin, Yusuf ibn al-Jawzi, took the Khilafah from Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani in the Tariqah. In terms of the fiqh, the creed, the understanding of ihsan, he took Khilafah from him. Now this is a very important point. I mentioned this before, and I think it's significant. Anyone who claims lineage to Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani rahimahullah in a capacity of tariqah, if Ibn Rajab Al-Hanbali or Shamsuddin ibn Qudama are not in their Senate chain, they're lying. I'll just be as straightforward as I can. If anyone claims tariqah lineage to Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, anyone, and Shamsuddin ibn Qudama rahimahullah, who is the nephew and successor of Imam Muwaffiquddin ibn Qudama, and Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali rahimahullah, if anyone claims lineage to it through them, if anyone claims lineage to Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani in the tariqah sense and they're not in the chain, that person is lying. They're either lying or they've been lied to by the person that told them. Because these are the khulafa, the later khulafa of it. This is one of the khulafa. Abu al-Muhassin is unbelievable in terms of his knowledge. Unbelievable. Now, Shaykh al-Islam Abu Abdullah al-Yunayni, Abu Abdullah al-Quda'i, they both died in 658 AH. Abu Abdullah al-Quda'i was a famous scholar of Andalus. He wrote a hadith collection that is, some printing houses have it as two collections, some two volumes, excuse me. Some have it as one big volume. You'll sometimes look in some old books, I mean going back hundreds of years, and you'll see someone state after a hadith, Ruwahu al-Quda'i, it's been narrated by Quda'i, right? That's him. He's very strong in hadith. So just because you say, oh, I've never heard of him, he's not from the six, he must not be very strong. No, he's strong. And what he did is he wrote commentaries on different collections and would sometimes combine between them and draw out the meanings in them. He was a very remarkable scholar from the city of Valence, or what they're saying now, Valencia. Right? Al-Izz ibn Abdul Salam dies in 660AH, great Shafi'i scholar. You have another, Ali ibn Wahab ibn Muti', who died in 667AH. He's known as Ibn Daqiq al-Eid al-Maliki, one of the great scholars. He had a son who's also called Ibn Daqiq al-Eid. But this Ibn Daqiq al-Eid is the big Maliki scholar. And his rank was so great, they said of Ibn Daqiq al-Eid that he is one of the guiding lights of the Ummah for his time. Ibn Daqiq al-Eid, he's a massive figure. If you study usul al-fiqh, or if you study the science of hadith, and his name doesn't come up, someone's not teaching you hadith or usul al-fiqh. That's like studying usul and Imam al-Ghazali's name doesn't come up. That's crazy. Or studying like ihsan or tasawwuf and Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani's not mentioned. That's insane. Someone's not teaching you properly. If you study these things, hadith or usul al-fiqh, Ibn Daqiq al-Eid's name, either one of them has got to come up. He's one of those people that his name will be mentioned because of his strength, because of his dedication, because of his knowledge, because of the depth of his argumentation. He's got to be mentioned. He's got to be. Another is Abu Muhammad al-Mursi, 669AH. He's one of the successors of Abu al-Hasan al-Shadli. All right, he's one of his successors, contemporary to his. Another is Abu Abdullah Muhammad al-Khazraji al-Qurtubi, great Maliki scholar and author of the famous commentary Al-Jami'u li Ahkam al-Qur'an. Let me tell you about Imam al-Qurtubi. He's called, some people, he's so famous they just call him Imam al-Qurtubi. This Imam, he died in 671AH. He's from Qurtuba, what they're now calling Cordova. Imam al-Qurtubi, rahimahullah, al-Khazraji, because he's from the Khazraj, from Medina. He's from the Khazraj. He's from the Sahaba from the Khazraj. He studied at a very young age, memorized the foundational texts of Maliki fiqh. It is unknown because the historians differ about whether he met Ibn al-Jawzi. Either Ibn al-Jawzi came to Andalus or he came to Baghdad. But what they are sure about is that they were contemporaries of each other and they knew one another. They either met either through correspondence or by physical contact, because there's an awful lot of cross-pollination between them, especially Imam al-Qurtubi's knowledge of comparative creed. His knowledge of comparative creed between Hanbalis and Ash'aris and Maturidis is, I mean, it's on a level higher than anyone else in Andalus in his time and before. His knowledge of that topic is unbelievable. His knowledge of fiqh is unbelievable. He has an absolutely dazzling way of describing points. His tafsir, his Jami' li Ahkam al-Qur'an, his tafsir, I remember having that read to us by a sheikh when we were in London. And his style is so similar to Imam Ibn al-Jawzi rahimahullah. His style is so similar to his. But Imam al-Qurtubi took a very analytical position. So what he would do is he would lay out the ayat. He would say, these are the ayat. And he would talk about the different ways to recite certain ayats that the Prophet ﷺ received. He would talk about they can be recited this way, they may be recited this way, it's permissible. And then he would talk about the language that's within them. And he would say, you must understand the lugha that is within this ayah. And he would break everything down and give you all of the meat that's within that ayah. And then he would start to comment upon it. And he would start to give commentary. And he's quoting books that had to have been sent to him by correspondence or brought by Ibn al-Jawzi or someone, because they're books outside of their sphere. And then he would only quote his imam's position last, to show respect that he wasn't so committed as a Maliki that he was actually partisan. So he would quote his imam last. Further to that, his knowledge over certain issues of creed showed that he had a very developed and mature attitude in theology. He was an Ash'ari, but he was able to be mature enough to where he could realize that in certain positions there was a difference in opinion. And he was able to take things that were so voluminous and shrink it down into one sentence. He wrote a book that had to do with fiqh masail called Jami' al-Fiqhiyya, Jami' al-Ahkam al-Fiqhiyya. That book, he stated within its pages, whenever you find an imam for a ruler going into his presence, you are not to pray behind him or show him any allegiance until he gives excuse or ceases from that action. Because he was a stickler about justice. He was a stickler about governance. He was a stickler about who the right people should be. And he witnessed the slow rise of Catholicism in Andalus. He witnessed it. And sometimes you'll see in his writings where he discusses things in some depth about these matters. He wrote a book on dhikr, the virtues of dhikr, at-tadhkirah. Remarkable. Qurtubi, Imam al-Qurtubi is one of, if not the greatest, he's one of the greatest scholars that ever came out of Andalus. One of the greatest. I mean, still today, if you mention his tafsir is called Jami' li Ahkam al-Qur'an. If you just say to someone that knows anything about the deen, that's studied, we're talking 11 years and up, not people that have done the weekend course here, the weekend course there. They have 11 years of studying up seriously. And you say, have you read or do you know about Tafsir al-Qurtubi? They'll know straight across. A smile will come on their face. They'll say, Subhanallah, do you have that? And if you say, yes, what are you doing with that? Akhi, astaghfirullah. You haven't studied these things where you should have it. Or if you say, well, no, I've heard of it because it was mentioned. They say, oh, yes, alhamdulillah, this alim, he's this, he's that. And they can tell you, no matter what madhab they're from. He receives such accolades because of his knowledge. You then have Sayfuddin Yahya ibn al-Nasih al-Hanbali, who died 662AH. Shamsuddin Abdullah ibn al-Awza'i, the Hanafi judge and great talent, who died in 673AH. This particular Imam, Shamsuddin al-Awza'i, the Hanafi judge, he was famous for his voluminous knowledge of the Hanafi texts. Because as we know, there's a narration in Samarkand, there's one in Egypt. He was able to join between the texts and give one unified fatwa. He was one of the first ones to do that. Whereas before, ulama who were Hanafi would give their fatwa from where they were from, because the madhab is gigantic. But he was drawing between the different strands and said, okay, the fatwa is this. The fatwa is this position. I've drawn between these 15 books. Here they are. This is your ruling. and he'd be right on the money. So he is one of those people. Another one was As-Sayyid al-Jalil Ahmed al-Badawi, who died in 675 AH. This is the famous Imam Ahmed al-Badawi, rahimahullah, who was the great scholar of Ihsan, the knower of Allah. His grave is visited a great deal in Egypt. His grave. Some things that go on there are permitted, that they give him salam and things, but there's some things that go on there that aren't really right. Our job is not to forbid people from visiting graves altogether, but to educate and inform people, listen, you should not be doing these unpraiseworthy activities in front of the Imam. Imam al-Badawi is a great alim. Another was Yahya an-Nawawi. Imam Sharafuddin Yahya an-Nawawi, Abu Zakaria. He died in 676 AH, rahimahullah. He wrote, as I showed, the Arba'in al-Nawawiyah. He wrote on, he was famously known for his knowledge of fiqh. He is the main voice, the mu'tamad, the dependent upon voice in Shafi'i fiqh. So when a Shafi'i will be looking for something, they will be looking in one of his authorized books for the fatwa. There's another book translated of his, which is called Al-Maqasid, which is his slim book on fiqh that he's done. That includes fiqh, some parts of creed as well. Imam Yahya an-Nawawi, rahimahullah, is from the Jamia Umayyah University. He studied there. He also studied and taught and was a rector at the Dar al-Hadith Institute, which requires that the teachers memorize at least 200,000 hadith. So he was no slouch either. He was one of the chief students of Imam Shamsuddin ibn Qudama, rahimahullah, although Imam Nawawi in his Ihsan, his tariqah, was Suhr Wirdi. We mentioned who Imam Suhr Wirdi was. He studied with Imam Shamsuddin ibn Qudama comparative creed and hadith. Had a deep knowledge of hadith with how much he memorized. So when he went from the Umayyah to taking the chair at the Dar al-Hadith, his knowledge was marvelous. He wrote a commentary called Sharh Sahih Muslim. The commentary on Sahih Muslim, it's 19 volumes, 18 volumes in most printings, with the printing of some Mawludi from Al-Azhar. That is one of the best commentaries I've ever read in my short life on the Sahih of Imam Muslim. One of the best I've ever read in my life. It's in Arabic. But Imam al-Nawawi, his classification of the ahadith, then his quoting of the different positions and the different schools of fiqh in that area, and then his summation. And it makes you realize why he's Shaykh al-Islam. He predeceased his own father. He died before his own father died, at the age of 44. Some historians say that he never married. Some historians say he never married. But he died at 44 and left behind a collection of literature that some scholars that are married have not left behind this level of literature. He wrote constantly. One of his students said that he used to see him writing 40 pages a day. So you can see why he left behind such a contribution to this ummah. Now we go from 679 to 699. 679 came with massive arguments and battles resulting from discussions between Imam Taqi Ibn Taymiyyah al-Hanbali and some of the Ash'ari Imams in this area that rejected his statements and resented his teaching style. We must make an introduction of this. The title Ibn Taymiyyah is, many different scholars have had this title. You have Majduddin Ibn Taymiyyah. He is the big alim, the number 2 voice in the Hanbali school for fatwa. Majduddin Ibn Taymiyyah. He died 653 AH. Majduddin Ibn Taymiyyah. There's another Ibn Taymiyyah. He's Fakhruddin Ibn Taymiyyah. And he died 622 AH. There's another Ibn Taymiyyah who's Shihabuddin Ibn Taymiyyah, who died 672 AH. Shihabuddin Ibn Taymiyyah is the son of Majduddin ibn Taymiyyah. And Shihabuddin ibn Taymiyyah is the father of Taqiyuddin ibn Taymiyyah, who was born 661AH. The other Ibn Taymiyyahs, many people in English have not heard of them. This one, they have heard of. He is Taqiyuddin ibn Taymiyyah from 661 to 728 Hijri. Came from a family of Hanbali theologians. His father was chief judge in Iraq from Baghdad. His grandfather was chief judge in Iraq. His father was the khatib and judge in Harran in Sham, where Taqiyuddin was born. Taqiyuddin Ahmed ibn Abdul Halim ibn Taymiyyah. Imam Taqiyuddin ibn Taymiyyah studied with Shamsuddin ibn Qudama, took tariqah from Shamsuddin ibn Qudama, studied creed, studied fiqh in many different areas. Now, to put him in his proper historical context, Taqiyuddin ibn Taymiyyah was at the level of mujtahid murajjih, which means he was a preferential mujtahid. He was able to take fatawa and draw between them. He was held to have memorized 400,000 hadith. So then why is there so much dispute about Taqiyuddin Ahmed ibn Abdul Halim ibn Taymiyyah? Why is there so much dispute about he's this, he's that, he has tariqah, he's an alim, he's this, he's a mujahid? Why is there all this dispute? It comes down to 11 main masail. 11 main masail that he discussed that he is alone on in his position. One is his positions on the names and attributes of Allah. That's one of the positions that he is isolated. He's alone in this position because some of the statements he went further than any of the ulama before him had gone in some of the statements that he made. Number two, in his collection, I mean, this is just 2 volumes of his Majmu' Fatawa. These 2 volumes that you can see on the table are volumes 10 and 11. They deal with tasawwuf. Volume 10 is called Kitab al-Tasawwuf. That's all it deals with. Taking tariqah, bay'ah, all these different things that happen in dhikr. The second one deals with suluk, how a Sufi is supposed to live. There's no dispute about his tasawwuf or his qadiriyah. There's no dispute about that. Because one of his students, Imam ibn al-Hadi, or one of his latter day pupils, Imam ibn al-Hadi, Ibn Abdul Hadi, he wrote the text, Kitab Badi Labs al-Tariqa. He wrote the book called The Book of the Beginning of Taking the Tariqah. And in it, Imam ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah is mentioned as having taken Khilafah from one of the Qadri Sheikhs. So that's not in dispute. It's in the Princeton Library. If you'd like, you can go and look at manuscript 8082, and it's in the Princeton Library. Now, you have to be able to know how to read manuscripts and palimpsest, but you can read it for yourself. So the second dispute regarding him had to do with what's in volume 10, where he was asked about the prophets. And he made a statement that was tantamount to attributing sin to prophets. It was tantamount. If you looked at this statement, some of the ulama saw it as tantamount to attributing sin to the prophets. Tantamount. The third issue regarding him has to do with the eternality of the fire. Because some of the ulama that examined his writings in his fatwa, they said that some of the writings were tantamount to his saying that the fire might go out. Some of them said this. The next mas'ala that there's an issue with is the issue of shafa'ah with the living that have departed this world. Some state, by looking at his writings, for example, his Qa'ida Jalila fi Tawassuli wal Wasila. This book, where he lays out his understanding that shafa'ah should not be made with those who are living that have departed from this world. It is an act of minor shirk to do so because those people have not asked you to do so. Right? Number 5, setting out to visit the graves. Imam Taymiyyah in this text as well, And in another text that has to do with visiting the graves stated that it's haram to set out to visit the graves. And he had a different understanding of a hadith, that he had a different contextual understanding of them. And there are some 6 other masail. Now, the ulama broke into 2 camps regarding him. The vast majority of ulama said, listen, he's a mujtahid murajjih, and you have to take from him what you must take from him and leave from him what you must leave from him. You have to be careful, because he's not agreed upon in these areas. He is alone in these fatwa, particularly when he gave the fatwa, and you'll want to write this down. He is the first one to give the fatwa that 3 divorces in one sitting in a state of purity is 1 divorce. He's the first one to have made that statement. 3 divorces in one sitting in a state of purity is 1 divorce. That contravenes everything. His father, his grandfather, Imam Muwafaquddin, all the ulama, all the way back, that contravenes everything that had come before. And when you find people quoting this to you, as you will sometimes in English, when you find people quoting this, it's always either coming from him or someone that read one of his books and took that on. Famously, one of his positions as well is that if someone neglects or left off a salah, they don't have to make qada of that salah. That's another mas'ala of his. That's another mas'ala of his. Now, there's a difficulty with this, because some people take this and say, you know, I didn't pray for a lot of my college years when I was in college. When I was in such and such school, I didn't do this, I didn't do that. Alhamdulillah, I'll take his fatwa, because he says that you miss those prayers, there's no way to make them up. So what you do is you just give charity or something like that, and life is good. Yes, but the only problem is you have to frame his whole fatwa. And the fullness of the fatwa is, the reason why there's nothing to make up is because during that time you were a murtad, you were a kafir. That's why there's nothing to make up. You were murtad. And so if you had children, the children were out of wedlock, your marriage was batil, there was no inheritance. If you want to take that fatwa, that's fine. But you have to take him framed in his full historical reality. And it's not pretty in some of the fatwa if you carry them to their full logical end. He once said, when he was in Egypt and he met Imam Ata'Allah, Imam Ata'Allah Askandarani, the famous Maliki alim who wrote the Hikam. And he said, Ya faqih, he said, oh faqih, to Imam Taymiyyah. He said, why do you have these positions that no one has but you? And he said, some of these positions come from my ijtihad and looking deeply into the text of the book and the sunnah. And he said, tell me about the intercession and tawassul. Why do you forbid it? He said, because I am closing the doors that could lead to possible sin by people engaging in it. And Imam Ata'Allah said, very well, then by that same standard, you have to cut off the faces and the front portions of women, because that will also be a way of stopping what leads to sin. And Imam Taqi, he laughed, because he understood the reason why Ata'Allah differed with him. But if you look at the people that differed with him in his time, they always addressed him and treated him as a scholar. When he died, even those who belonged to the second category, they were enemies to him. Some made takfir on him and called him a kafir. But they prayed on him. And he's buried near the General Hospital in Damascus. Now there's some people, وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ, that went, urinated on his grave. They've kicked and defaced the headstone of his grave. Why would you do that? There's no reason to do that. You must understand about him, whether it's Ibn al-Imad, the historian, Imam Ibn Kathir, Imam Ibn Rajab, and all these other imams that have discussed him, whether they differed with him or not, they always have things that are framed very carefully, because he was a mujtahid. And advice to someone is, when you look at Imam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, Tajuddin Ibn Taymiyyah's Majmu' Fatawa, is 37 volumes. And he developed a lot over that period. If you read from cover to cover, there was a lot of development. And a lot of his positions aren't the same, like the position that I stated in volume 10 regarding the prophets and their infallibility. There's other books that you can read by him that appear to contradict that. So he had a lot of development. And as a mujtahid now, should he have been making ijtihad in theology? No. But nonetheless, he did, and he's a mujtahid. And so there's a certain amount of respect that goes with that. Now, what do the people do about him? Those that disparage him and say whoever refuses to call him kafir is a kafir, they lie. And those who put him on the level as if he is a mujtahid mutlaq, they lie. Because he's neither of those. He's neither a kafir, nor is he a bringer of his own madhab. He's squarely within the madhab of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, squarely, in his fiqh, most of it. With the exception of the issue about the 3-in-1, the ziyarah of the graves, the qada of the salawat, and a few other masail where he's very lenient. Besides that, he's squarely within the madhab. And so you have to be careful sometimes about how you address him. My advice would be, if you're going to say, listen, how do we know to differentiate between this or that and what do we do? Then stick with the people that there's no dispute in. No one disputes about Imam Muwafiquddin. If you don't know your way how to navigate through this minefield, fine. You say, listen, I respect him, he was a mujtahid, but there's areas where I don't know where to step right. And so because of that, I don't leave him because he's not a scholar, because I don't know where to take things. So I'm going to go to those who there's no dispute about. No one disputes about Imam al-Rajab. No one disputes about Imam al-Kathir. Right? The next student that comes is Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyah. Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyah is perhaps the main codifier of Imam Ibn Taymiyyah's works. He died 751 AH. And he held many of the same positions that Taqiyuddin ibn Taymiyyah held. One of his positions about the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ being seated on the Arsh next to Allah in his Bada'il Fawaid, volume 4. Now that is severe. Some printings it's in volume 3, some printings it's in volume 4. Now that is severe. And there's other works that he has that are equally problematic. But again, he's a mujtahid. He wrote numerous documents, again, from the tariqah. He's from the tariqah. Numerous doctrines on ihsan. His commentary on Manazil al-Sa'irin, which is written by the great Abu Ismail al-Ansari, the great Hanbali Sufi alim of Herat, right? Who's still Khawaja Ansari Sahab. They still, if you mention him, they still know who he is. So you have to look at these people in their framework, that they were mujtahids, they were ulama, but they're not the mu'tamid in the school of Imam Ahmad. They're the last people that get quoted. And there are other ulama that you'll be on safer ground with. But you must refrain from takfir. And the people that claim that they belong to them, you have to leave them alone as well, because both groups lie. The middle path is just what's been outlined here. Now, Abgha, the king of the Tatars after Hulugu Khan, died in the year 680 AH, and this caused further division in the army. Conversion to Islam began slowly, but it was mostly syncretized, as some of the Tatars would claim Christianity, Islam, or Judaism, but still resort to ancestor worship and other rites of shamanism that they believed essential to their culture. Around the year 683 AH, Ahmed ibn Hulugu died after being the king of the Tatars after his brother Abgha. He was the least evil of the Tatars to come to the Muslim world, but still engaged in syncretism. Once the Tatars were smarting from some of the losses, Muslims and their strength in the world was looking up again as of 688 AH, when they began stabilizing North Africa and putting down rebellions from false prophets and also rebel warlords. 689 AH brought a cause for great celebration and happiness for the Muslims, as the castles were demolished and all remaining vestiges of Crusader power were driven from Sham. This was also the same year that the king of the Tatars after Ahmed, the great Khan Araghun, died after suffering poisoning from his Jewish minister at arms. Now, deaths during this time include Imam Shamsuddin ibn Qudama in 682 AH, Amatul Haq bint al-Hafidh in 685 AH, one of the great female scholars of this ummah. Amatul Haq. Zainab bint Makki in 688 AH. Another person died was Afifuddin al-Masani, one of the Sufis who exaggerated and apostated from the faith by becoming a Nusayri. Right? Some of the ulama mention him as coming back, some of the historians. A Nusayri, this happened in 689 AH. A Nusayri are the Alawiyah. It's another word for the Alawiyah, the people who currently rule Sham, who currently rule Syria in Damascus. They claim that the Prophet Shu'aib alayhi salam had additional revelations and that the 5 pillars of Islam are internal, they're not external. So the Hajj that you make is the Hajj in your heart from bad thoughts. And that the zakah that you make is the smile that you give to people and the charity that you give by treating them right. They have all these other strange rites. Reincarnation and other bizarre beliefs. Okay, they have strange beliefs. Okay, another is Sharafuddin Hassan ibn Sharaf al-Maqdisi, Ibn Hamdan al-Harrani in 695 AH. All right, Ibn Hamdan al-Harrani wrote a book on comparative creed, which is one of the most sought after and authoritative books on the topic. A lot of the later seminaries teach his book, which is, it's been summarized by Imam Balbani. It's a book that is the Nihayat al-Mubtadi'in fi Usul al-Din. It has another title as well, which is longer, but that's one of the ways that the book is referred to. And he wrote a book that compares between a lot of the differences that there are between Hanbalis and Ash'aris and others. Another that died is Aisha bint al-Majid, who was a teacher and judge in 697 AH. Another was Sophia bint Abdul Rahman, who narrated from Imam Muwafiq al-Din ibn Qudama. She narrated most of his books. The Lum'ah is narrated through her. His Al-Mughni is narrated through her. See, these are the people of the Ummah, not just men, they were females that were preserving this deen. You had Muhammad ibn Abdul Qawi ibn Badran in 699 AH, who died at Salihiyah. Now in 701 AH, the Egyptian Abbas al-Khalifa Abu al-Abbas al-Hakim bi-Amrillah the first, he died. This Khalifa, he'd ruled for 40 years. After his time, the Khilafah went to al-Muqtafi the first, who was his son, and the 40th Abbasid Khalifa. He was the 3rd Egyptian Abbasid to the Mamluk Sultans. By this time, Ghazan, the great Khan, he'd made it all the way to Sham in 702 AH. And he was marching against the people, and he was victorious again. He was met by an army of Muslims, one of its generals being Taqiyuddin Ahmed ibn Taymiyyah. The Muslims were victorious, but not without heavy losses being inflicted on both sides. The numbers reached 10,000 or 20,000 on each side. Tatar forces suffered a setback in 703 AH when Ghazan died and had to be taken to Tabriz for burial. 704 AH found Taqiyuddin ibn Taymiyyah in the place of an-Narinj, cutting good luck charms from the ceiling that the people used to come and take from and make oaths and seek blessings. So whenever he saw these good luck charms, there was a masjid there, and he saw people hanging good luck charms and things like this up, and he used to cut those things because he didn't want people making good luck charms. He say, well, if you have this, you'll be really lucky. Like now, you'll find people that they have a lucky rabbit's foot, or they have other things that they do. They keep like one die in their pocket, or things like this. These are lucky things. He used to go and cut those things. So when he saw those ribbons that they would hang or those things, he cut them with the hope that they would say, wait a minute, how could this be lucky if it got cut? Who cut it? And what would, that means it's not lucky. Hopefully people would see that and realize, oh, that's bad luck. But wait a minute, how could it be bad luck if it's lucky? And then it got cut. How could that? And then would confuse those people. And hopefully he'd think that they would learn from that and they wouldn't do it anymore. Also in this time, in 719 AH, Taqiyuddin ibn Taymiyyah was stopped by the judiciary from giving fatwa, allowing expiation in the matter of making an oath by way of divorce. What that means is this. He was stopped by the judiciary from giving fatwa on this issue because he had said, if someone swears on pain of their being divorced from their wife irrevocably, that's 3 at once, They swear something and it turns out not to be true. So you swear an oath and you say, okay, I've irrevocably divorced, quote, I've irrevocably divorced my wife 3 times if, and you mentioned one of these sports heroes, doesn't have this score. And then later we dig into our research and find out, oh, subhanAllah, he didn't get that score, right? You're irrevocably divorced. But what Imam Taqi ibn Taymiyyah said is no. If you give some charity or some expiation, you're still married. The ulama said no. And they stopped him from giving. They said, don't give any more fatwa. Some of his students were still giving some fatwa. They said, no, you cannot discuss this issue any longer. The judiciary stopped it because what they were concerned about is this. Let's look at the issue of the 3-in-1. A man says to his wife, quote, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you. Or I divorce you 3 times, or I divorce you 1,000 times. That means that she's been divorced irrevocably. She has to go through 3 monthly cycles. She cannot get married with that husband again unless she's been married to someone else. And let's say the marriage doesn't work out, and then she's divorced, and then they may remarry. Prior to then, it's not valid. Tajuddin ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah, he says, no, it's only one. And he gives his reasonings, which are coming 700 years after the fact. But let's look at it from a practical usul standpoint. Let us just say that the 3-in-1 is only one. If the 3-in-1 was only one divorce, she could still get married back with him, and the most that you've done is separated them after one divorce, which is permitted anyway for her to get married again after one divorce. So you've done nothing impermissible. At the most, you've just delayed them coming back together. But if the 3 divorces in one time are 3, and you've kept them together, you are a party to fornication because they're no longer married, and when they have children, they are out of wedlock, and that affects the inheritance. Look at this purely usul. And that's why they were so stringent at going after him on that issue. Further to this, some of his students continued to pass the ruling in spite of the statement of the judiciary. There was also a huge war between the Franks and the Muslims in Andalus, in which 60,000 or more Franks died and not more than 13 Muslims died. A huge flood in 725 AH leveled most of Baghdad with the exception of the grave of Imam Ahmed and some of the masjids. It remained for nearly a week in this state until the water crested and began to subside. Uthman ibn Taghrabak ibn Sulayman Shah ibn Uthman, or Uthman the first ruler and king of the Uthmani governance. He died in 725 AH. So the first Ottoman had died. The first Ottoman. The second Ottoman ruler, Uthmani ruler, would be Awr Khan. He learned valuable lessons from his father about empire building. So look at what was going on in this time. The people bringing the religion were the Turkish. The Arabs, the Abbasids, were just figureheads. They had some Khilafah, but they were figureheads. The Turks were bringing the religion. And you started to see the Seljuks, and then there were the Ottomans that were defending Islam and doing all these other things. During the consolidation process from 726 to 738 AH, the people of Iraq and Azerbaijan were in constant fear and concern of wars or famine. In the year 739 AH, Taqiyuddin as-Subki took over the judiciary for the Shafi'i scholars in Sham, and the people loved him greatly. Al-Mustakfi, the Abbasid Khalifa, died in 740 AH after a long reign. The reins of power then went to his son, the 40th Abbasid Khalifa, his name being Al-Wathiq Billah II. 741 AH came, and there was a massive earthquake that rocked Sham, Egypt, and Alexandria, along with the death of Al-Wathiq in this same year. After that came Al-Hakim bi Amrillah II, the 41st Abbasid Khalifa. His reign was until 753 AH, after which time Al-Mu'tadid the first, the 42nd Abbasid Khalifa, began to rule. Awar Khan al-Uthmani, the second Khalifa of the Uthman government, died in 761AH, leaving it to Murad the first, the third Ottoman Khalifa. Another death came in the year 763AH, but this time it was that of Al-Mu'tadid the first. He left his reign to his son Muhammad, the 43rd Abbasid Khalifa, and he was known thereafter as Mutawakkil ala Allah the first. Okay. Deaths in this year, or in this time, include Wajihuddin at-Tanuhi. He died in 701AH. If you go back and remember the lessons that we did, we went from cover to cover, both volumes of Al-Adab al-Shar'iyyah. Remember how many times Imam Wajihuddin's name came up. Dozens. A fantastic figure. A renowned scholar. Mas'ud ibn Ahmed al-Harithi in 711AH. Safiyuddin Abu Abdullah al-Armawi from India's coast in 715AH, one of the great scholars there. Muhammad ibn Dawood as-Sinhaji, he's the Maliki scholar of Berber origin and the writer of al-Ajrumiyyah. If you study Arabic grammar in depth, one of the texts that you'll run across eventually is called al-Ajrumiyyah. This Imam, Muhammad ibn Dawood as-Sinhaji, is a Berber. And he is also known as Al-Ajrum. Now, this text, Al-Ajrumiyyah, is a skeleton of the Arabic language. If you memorize that text, perfect it with the commentary, you know Arabic. You know Arabic. Once you understand the skeleton of Arabic, it's only 600 verbs. It's only 600 verbs. Memorize the 600 verbs. I knew a Muslim brother. He used to be Jehovah's Witness. He became Muslim. Allah guided him to this deen. I used to see him in the library, always reading from this book in Arabic and rocking back and forth in the library chair. I used to wonder what he was doing. And then one day he walked up to me and started speaking fluent Arabic. You know what he was doing? He memorized the 600 verbs. He memorized the 600 verbs. I could not believe it. Subhanallah. He said, yeah. Once I memorized the verbs, just putting things together just came after. He's watching the news and turning the channels and watching the Arabic satellite networks and everything. He was Jehovah's Witness 4 or 5 years ago. This man was a clear-cut kafir. Now he's Muslim and he's fluent in Arabic. He's teaching people Arabic. Amazing. No, it's not that hard. It can be done. It can be done. Now, Imam Sinhaji died 723AH. Taqiyuddin ibn Taymiyyah died in 728AH in jail. Right? He died in jail. He'd been arrested numerous times because of some of the fatwa. Ultimately, he died in jail because of the fatwa. Imam Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah was released from prison after Imam Taqi ibn Taymiyyah died. He was released. He died in 751AH. Imam Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah is the main narrator and collector of the reason why we have his writings is because of Ibn Qayyim. If Imam Ibn Qayyim had not collected and put all these things together, we probably would not have had the writings preserved in front of us other than quotes in other books. So he did a very remarkable job. Another one is Imam Shamsuddin Muhammad ibn Muflih al-Maqdisi in 763AH. Now we have to talk about him very briefly. Imam ibn Muflih al-Maqdisi rahimahullah, Imam Shamsuddin Muhammad ibn Muflih al-Maqdisi. It is his book that it took us 2 years, Al-Adab al-Shar'iyyah. Allah blessed us to go through that book in 2 years. We ultimately did the khatam in this building here, but we started at my home. He is the writer of that text. He is the commentator on Al-Muqni', and he wrote his book Al-Furu', Kitab al-Furu', which is a book that deals with the masail in fiqh. He had met Imam Taqi ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah. He said to him one day, he said, you're not Ibn Muflih, you are Muflih, which means the successful. It's because any masail that he went into and studied, he mastered them. And this book, Kitab al-Furu', which is in 3 large, thick volumes in Arabic, is one of his most outstanding achievements in the areas of fiqh. Al-Adab al-Shar'iyya was for him to take all the sciences of Islam and to boil the soup down to where when we took it, we could taste the carrots, the celery, the meat, all these other things in the soup and say, Alhamdulillah, this is just a shot of pure Islam. In all of its different facets, in just one spoonful. That is Al-Adab al-Shar'iyya. That's what he gave you in those 2 volumes. So, in his time, he became the chief of the judiciary. And he was a Qadi over 5 countries. He was a Qadi and judge over 5 countries. Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, Palestine, and what's today called Israel. He was a judge over 5 countries. And again, he belongs to that Palestinian lineage. Again, the Palestinians have given us so much. He's a Palestinian. What have we given back to the Palestinians? Look at all the knowledge they've given us. Subhanallah. The final death we mention is this Imam, is Imam Najmuddin Sulaiman ibn Abdul Qawi al-Tufi al-Sarsari, the great Baghdadi. He died 716 AH. He wrote Al-Bulbul fi Usul al-Fiqh, which is a very famous book in Usul al-Fiqh. He wrote a book on creed. He wrote numerous documents. He is one of the few Ash'ari Hanbalis in history. One of the few. He was one of the students of Imam Taqi ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah, one of his students. He wrote consistently. His knowledge of usul is mind-boggling. This book, Al-Bulbul, is actually a summary of a bigger book by Imam Muwaffaq ibn Qudama called Rawdatul Nadir. And Rawdatul Nadir is Imam Muwaffaq friendly answer to Imam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali's Usul al-Fiqh manual, Al-Mufti wal-Mustafti. So it's all connected to Sheikh Abdul Qadir, Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, all the way. It's all connected up. We have been blessed by having these people in our presence, even just in book form, by having these people in our presence, and I've felt always very privileged as having been able to teach you and even just mention their name. Because these people, after the prophets, more than any other people, sacrificed for us. All of the things that we take for granted, the dotting and the vowelling in the Qur'an, the fact that you even know what fiqh is, the fact you even know what hijab is, the fact that you even know what Islam is, and that you don't have some other strange and bizarre understanding. The fact that Sunnis have and are and always will be in the majority is because of them, because of the sacrifices that they made. So here's what I want you to do then in closing. In closing, you need to think about this. If you have a family, or if you come from a big family, and you say, okay, there are 10 brothers, there are 10 sisters, there are 10 sisters and brothers. You need to select 1 or 2 of you that are going to say, okay, you 2 are going to be set aside and dedicated purely for the preservation of this religion. If you have kids and you're not all of them, you say, okay, well, this one, he's got to be a doctor and this one's got to be a barrister because his parents are on my back and I just can't deal with it because they won't leave me alone. Fine. But one of them should be taken aside and consecrated for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's deen. At least one of them. Because those are how scholars are made, is they're taken aside, they're consecrated, they're worked on. Scholars aren't made by us saying, well, alhamdulillah, big ulama. Yeah, but he's dead. But he's dead. He had successors. Okay, well, that means someone's got to get in there. Say, yeah, but I don't know if I could do that, if I've got the ability or the attention span or whatever else. Well, listen, if Allah makes it possible for you to live 20 years, 15 years, inshallah, you'll develop it. He'll help you. If you want to be a student of knowledge or study and go into scholarship, you need 3 things. you may care to write it down. You need 3 things. You want to be a real student of knowledge? You want to be a scholar, student of knowledge, and or on the way to being a scholar, or just getting a door in as a sincere student of knowledge? You need 3 things. You may care to write them down. The first is omnivorous reading. Omnivorous reading. Translation. You have to be someone that reads and contemplates deeply in all areas and streams of thought. You have to be someone that can study about the massacres in North America just as much as you study about usul al-fiqh. You have to be able to join between the streams and then connect them meaningfully. That is omnivorous reading. You have to be able to delve into many things. That's why our fuqaha, they're not said, oh, he was an astronomer. He was a physician. They were all those things. He was a mathematician, an astronomer, a physician. He was a pediatrician. They were all those things. They weren't one thing. Because their stream of thought and reference was so deep, they were in all of that. Okay? So you have to be an omnivorous, all or nothing reader. Well, I like science fiction, but I don't like this. No, you have to delve into all of it. Number 2 thing that you need. Number 2 thing. You have to possess a burning desire in your heart that drives you, and you are driven by this. You have to be driven by it. This is something, this way, this shughul, this work of being a student of knowledge or going for scholarship, to put it bluntly, this is not for punks. It's real serious. And you have to dedicate time. You have to have drive. You have to be able to sometimes pull, and I mean it, sometimes you'll have to pull a 24-hour. Because people will keep you up because they've come and they've got a problem. Someone tried to kill himself or whatever else. You're looking up the mas'ala. You have these other issues and you have to pull a 24-hour. Sometimes you got to pull a 28-hour because there's all types of other stuff going. They say, we need you here right now. We can't just listen to it on the phone. We've got to have you here now. You have to be driven. You have to be the one that gets up, that does the research, and you've been looking for the answer to one mas'ala for 4 months. Trying to find that mas'ala, trying to find that mas'ala, and then you find it, and you say, Allahu Akbar, and you find it, and you answer the question, and then you get another one, similar to the 4-month mas'ala that you had before, and then the process begins again. But you love it, because you're dedicated to that. And then number three, you are not happy and cannot enjoy doing anything else but that. If you're a footballer, be a footballer. But don't delve into this. You like playing basketball? Got a good jump shot? Fine, be the next Jordan. But this matter is deep. Want to be a barrister? Study your dusty old books all day long? That's cool. But don't come into this matter because you're not happy doing anything else. So if you get a call at 2 in the morning and you get shaken out of bed at 2, 3 in the morning, you're not saying to yourself, Akhi or Ukhti or sister, why are you calling me at this hour? What do you mean, why are you calling me at this hour? Because you took up on the mantle of following the way of the prophets and the students of knowledge that came after them from the scholars, and you are public property. Your personal life, your free time ended when you made that decision. I haven't had free time or rest in 20 years. My free time finished in 1990. That's finished now. I don't have any free time. I don't have a personal life. Yeah, what do you do for your personal time to kick back? I don't. That's just it. I don't have one. And that's not to scare anybody or anything like that, but it's just I became, and you'll see a stamp on my back. If lost, please return to Ummah, private property. And that's the real. That's realness. If you see me lost or ever cruising like I'm socializing, there'll always be that one. I met someone in the grocery store. Yeah, I got nothing to do right now. I just go in the grocery store, take a look at a couple of things. Got approached out of nowhere. Are you brother so-and-so? Yeah, I've got this question about this issue. I can't go anywhere. I can't go anywhere. Why? Because the stamp's on the back. Ooh, look, there it is. One of the Ummah's products is out. And that's reality. If you don't have all three of them, I don't want to see people doing the snake eyes and doing the crap dice and say, ooh, I've got one of the three. No, if you don't have all three of those things, don't do it. You're safer being a common Muslim. Most of the Ummah's common Muslim. All right? You're safer than that, than a scholar or being a student of knowledge like what I'm doing. You're safer. Because I'm telling you, there's the three in the morning calls, there's visits, unexpected visits, you don't know why. How are you going to get angry at an unexpected visit? What are you studying and doing all this for? Of course you're going to have unexpected visits. Guests are going to come by at funky times in the morning. What are you doing here? What do you mean, what am I doing here? You claim that you know about the Qur'an and Sunnah. That's why I'm here. What's your excuse? Because it's the common Muslim's job to do that and to cross-examine you. You don't like being cross-examined? Sit down then. Because this isn't for you. Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but what about this? You have to be willing to be cross-examined. And then finally, in ending all this off, of those three things, the person that has those three things has to know the following types of people, which are two in number. The first type of person will be the one that'll say, you know, brother, or you know, sister, what about, and they'll ask you the mas'ala. Now that person, when they ask you the mas'ala, they can deal with you also quoting more proofs to them. So you'll say, listen, Imam Nawawi, or Imam Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, or Imam Muwafaquddin ibn Qudama rahimahullah, they say, and then you give a little bit of the evidence. They can deal with that. They can deal with that. They're ready for that. They may even follow up the question. Imam Muwafaquddin says this, okay, alhamdulillah, why did he say that? You can give further follow-up. You have a second category of people, though. And those are people that just based upon the rank and the authority that these people have, they take it. Don't overburden them with extra, because I've had times where someone has said such and such, Imam Muwafaquddin says this, Imam Muwafaquddin ibn Qudama rahimahullah, he says this is the answer to the mas'ala, and he says this because the evidence, he's like, no, I don't need all of that. If Imam Muwafaquddin ibn Qudama rahimahullah, he says that, that's enough for me. Don't burden those people by giving them too much to take back, because sometimes the person that you're on the phone with or that is sitting in the majlis with you, he's not asking for him. He or she is taking it back to someone else. So when you see them, you have to immediately have the critical skills to analyze and say, okay, is so-and-so here because of him? Or is so-and-so here because of other people? And if he's here because of him, what does he need to know? Let's not waste the common man's time. You have to know adab al-mufti wal-mustafti, the etiquettes of the person giving the ruling or the person that deduces it or can find it, and the person asking for it. You have to know both of them so you can judge both types of people. Sometimes a person will be there and say, yes, Imam Ibn Abidin, the big Hanafi judge, he said this. Oh, okay, and that's the end of it. Some people, they say, oh, okay, I understand. Don't mix between the two people. Because some of the people, someone will say, yeah, I understand that, but what is the proof behind this? Because I have people that are arguing with me about this issue. Okay, and then you become angry that, oh, well, who are you to ask me for evidence? And then you get upset and you get worked up, and then he's like, you're not a student of knowledge, you're an imposter, I don't trust you. And now you've got some of the commonality from the ummah, they don't trust you because of what you did. And then the common man who's come to you, he just needs, what did Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani say about this issue? That's all he needs. What did Imam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, what did he say? And you quote it. Alhamdulillah. He goes back, he tells his wife or his loved ones, he said this. Alhamdulillah. But when you give him the whole panoramic application, he goes back, he doesn't remember all of what had been said, and he may make mistakes in transcribing what you told him. And then there are thousands of people in India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Egypt, other places. Thousands that had misunderstood what you told him. And they've said, yeah, that makes sense. I'm going to do that too. And then you have thousands of people taking that from you. And on the day of resurrection, at the throne of Allah, there you are. In all of your regalia, being punished by the angels and cross-examined like nobody's business in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you even get punished for it too. So you get two things out of it. So you have to really look at the person that's coming to you, that's interfacing with you. Who is this person? Even when you have a crowd, sometimes you have a crowd of people. You have to know, okay, I've got to give so-and-so this. And then there'll be the other person on the left says, yes, but what is the proof for that? That's showing you that there's the two people present in the crowd. And it's a science and an art to be able to judge between that. Something that people that want to be students of knowledge or scholars have to be dedicated to doing. This is a serious science. It's a serious way. But all of you should think about either thinking about it yourself or pushing someone that you can see next to you that's got the fire and give them that extra little nudge because you know they can do it. There's the sister that's kind of shy, but whenever you ask her about a mas'ala, she's sharp as a tack. Her memory is like steel. It holds everything. You say, subhanAllah, she should be doing more with herself. There's the brother that he's quiet, isn't saying much. He doesn't want people to I don't want people thinking I'm knowledgeable. But when he speaks outright knowledge, and then he goes quiet again because he doesn't want to get caught out. Because he doesn't want people coming in, oh, there's the sheikh right there. No, just leave me alone, man. That's why he doesn't say anything in the first place, because he doesn't want that to happen. Those are the people you want to put forward. Then there's the person who, he has knowledge and he transcribes and he studies. Those are the people that need to be put forward. Whether you're one of them or whether you know someone, push them forward. Because the thing is the ulama, they die. And there must be others that come behind them. And we can't just merely sit and say, subhanAllah, this is a beautiful game. But it must be for some of us to say, alhamdulillah, I'll join in. Or I know someone that wants to join in. And we bring them in. Right? So it's very important. أقول قولي هذا استغفر الله لي ولكم أستغفر الله إن الله غفور رحيم يرحم الراحمين. I apologize for taking so much of your time. We've entered the question and answer part. I know that I've ran through sort of a lot of material. Is there a question over what I've covered so far? Yes. Is it Yahya an-Nawawi? Imam Yahya an-Nawawi, yes.
Yeah, he said he's got a Muslim commentary.
Yes, it's called Sharh Sahih Muslim. It's 18 volumes. The best printing and the best copy that's unexpunged and uncorrupted is the Sammaluti edition from Egypt. The rest of them always have one or more defects because they either don't print from original manuscripts or they tamper with the words of Imam Nawawi. The best edition is the Sammaluti Egyptian edition. Sammaluti was a big Shafi'i alim last century. Yes. Is there another question? Yes.
You mentioned Baybars.
Yes.
Could you give us a little bit more history about him? Because was he a scholar?
Okay. There was two questions. One, it was about Imam Nawawi rahimahullah with regards to his book on the Sharh Sahih Muslim, which he wrote. We mentioned that it's 18 volumes. The Sammaluti edition is the best. The second is regarding Baybars, al-Bunduqdari. Baybars, as the case was with all the young Mamluks when they grew up, they studied fiqh, they were Shafi'is, studied creed, they were Ash'aris. And they either had a sheikh or were somewhere leaning towards ihsan. Baybars was one of the more amazing of them. And he was scholarly, a scholar. He was called a Malik al-Zahir, the dominant or victorious reigning king. And from the people that wrote biography on him, Baha'uddin al-Maqdisi and others, they mentioned his scholarship, that he was a scholar.
So how was Yahya
Imam Yahya Nawawi?
Nawawi, sorry.
Yes.
Why would he say that it was a tyrannical?
because of the way that he took over Sham. When Baybars took over Sham, he took it from the petty or small fief-like ruler that had been over it. And Imam Nawawi was not pleased with the way that it happened and the way that he was conducting the policies over Sham. It's for that reason that Imam Nawawi rahimahullah differed with him. But he never said that people should rebel against him or they shouldn't listen to him. But he differed with him because he said some of his policies were dhulm. And you'll find that, I mean, with the Abbasids, some of the Abbasid scholars that were Hanafis within the governance, some of the other Hanafi scholars differed with him because they said it's not right. Because Hanafis by nature are fiscal conservatives. They're fiscally conservative. What that means is big government, massive government, very small private sector. Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, big government, huge government. Itty bitty, teeny weeny private sector. That's the Hanafi fiqh because they're fiscal conservatives. Some of the Hanafis wanted to be more fiscally liberal, where they thought the private sector should be bigger and there should be more investment in private sector and more individuality given to private entrepreneurship. And so there was this tension between them. And that's not because the other scholars weren't scholars and the ones opposing them were scholars. It's merely a situation of a difference of opinion that happens among the scholars. Yes? Yes?
You know that when you Ibn Hamdan al-Haram,
yes.
Book of Comparative Creed.
Yes, Book of Comparative Creed. He died 662AH. His Book of Comparative Creed is called Nihayatul Mubtadi'een fi Usul ad-Din. That's one of the titles for it. It's a big book. It's quite thick. There was a commentary. It's a large commentary, and then it was shortened by Imam Balbani. Imam Muhammad al-Balbani, rahimahullah, he died 1083 Hijri. He wrote a commentary on it called Mukhtasar al-Ifadat. It was the last section of there on Ma'rifatullah. In that area it's a shortening of Ibn Hamdan's text.
What's it called?
Mukhtasar al-Ifadat, which is, it's a fiqh manual, but in the last part of it, there is a part called Ma'rifatullah, which is Imam al-Balbani's summary of Ibn Hamdan. Ibn Hamdan, his book in its natural form, without its being condensed, it's best to read that with someone because Ibn Hamdan is very deep. Very, very deep. Is there another question? Yes.
When you said this, Alhamdulillah, Sheikh George, we told,
Yeah.
Khalifa from Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani.
Yes.
And
Abu
he
Muhammad.
Three of his sons by the Tatars.
Yes.
And you said that, I didn't quite understand when you said it, when he took Khalifa from him, people said he was lying or something like that.
Okay. All right. The question is regarding the people, the Abu Muhassin ibn al-Jawzi and the Khilafah from the Qadris. Okay. The point of it is understanding how Khilafah works for those of the Qadri chain. If anyone, what I stated is, if anyone claims in this era to be from the silsila or the tariqah of Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, if anyone claims that, and Imam Shamsuddin ibn Qudama or Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali are not in that chain, they are either lying or that person that said it has been lied to. We don't say they're all liars, but we say that they've been lied to or they are lying because the Sanad, the chain, is so carefully documented. It's not as wide as the other chains. It tends, the Qadi chain is it's like a single person chain. The most that it's ever been is like 3 at once. And then it went down into 1, and then 1, and then 2, and then 1, and then 3, and then 1. It's very, very narrow. So it's like part of the issue that we see is there's so many people claiming lineage to his tariqah. He's got people doing jumping jacks, people smoking hashish, people doing other things, and saying, listen, we are Qadiris. But how? What is the lineage? And we can't just take them at face value. We have to say, where did you get your lineage from? And to this day, those that claim that have not satisfactorily been able to produce the lineage. Most people can't. And the reason for it is because it's not there. So that's what I was sort of trying to draw attention to, is that most of the people that claim lineage to him today to do some of the reprehensible things that we see have no connection to Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani. Not just from a physical or sunnah standpoint, but even silsila-wise. They have no connection to him. Yes? Is there another question? Yes?
Sorry, just going on to his question before we move on. You mentioned if there, with the Qadiris there's a bit of an issue. So if there is someone who's been lied to somewhere down the chain, should the chain be ended?
Question is if someone has been lied to regarding the chain of the Qadiris down the line, should the chain be ended? Alhamdulillah, the chain does end. Because if there's no lineage to that person, there was no chain. So the chain does end. Whether they've been, deceived piously or otherwise, the chain does end. By linkage to him, I'm not referring to people that are related to Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, because there could be people in Iran related to him, people in Pakistan related to him, people in India. I'm referring solely to his khilafahship in his silsila and the methodology that he passed down from his books. If someone has been innocently deceived, then there's no linkage. They can still have linkage to him in terms of following his methodology, sleeping on the floor, avoiding tea and coffee, not eating meat 2 days in a row, these things that are coming from the Sunnah. Other things such as this, that lead to the perfection of the material self and the disciplining of the soul. So they'll have a linkage in that sense. Yes? Okay. All right.
Sorry, I'll ask you one specific question. You mentioned Imam al-Qurtubi.
Yes.
He either met or sent letters to Ibn al-Jawzi.
Imam Abdul Rahman ibn al-Jawzi. Now there's a confusion that's there. Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah studied at the institute that was built by Abdul Rahman ibn al-Jawzi. So Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah, who died 751AH, studied at the big institution of Imam Ibn al-Jawzi, who died 597 Hijri. So they're two different people. One is Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr. Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr is Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah. And Abdul Rahman, Abu al-Faraj, Abdul Rahman ibn al-Jawzi is Ibn al-Jawzi. Right? So Ibn al-Jawzi lived almost a century before. Yes?
So is he called
43 years.
Sorry, is he called Jawziyah because he went to
that institution? That's right. That's correct. Okay? So the question was the difference between Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah and Imam Abu al-Faraj Abdul Rahman ibn al-Jawzi, that they are two different people, one living 43 years before the other, or more, 43 years or more. Yes? Okay. Final question?
It's different. You mentioned right at the beginning, do you know, when there was a time where there was no Khilafah,
Yes.
people were given bay'ah to the ulama.
Yes.
What type of bay'ah was that?
Alhamdulillah. The question is, what type of bay'ah were they giving to the ulama? Well, the ulama, we must remember that they had been ruling the ummah up until when Yazid came in. And then there was that period of the struggle between them. And then the ulama came back in. The ulama were still ruling them with the understanding that had been taken from al-Qadi Abu Ya'la the elder. So if you remember that agreement that he had with al-Qa'im bi-amrillah, they were still under that understanding that they're still running everything, they're still controlling everything, they're still in charge. The bay'ah of the ulama is different to the bay'ah of the bay'ah of the rulers. The bay'ah of the rulers is taken, but the bay'ah of the ulama is assumed. And it's based upon the leadership that's been given to them by the Prophet ﷺ and Surah An-Nisa, the 4th Surah, ayah 59 and 60, in which Allah says, obey Allah, obey the Messenger, and those in authority among you. So their leadership is already subsumed within that ayah.
Is there a formality to declaring that bay'ah?
It's allowed, but often it was something that was just understood and that they ruled without a necessary bay'ah, like how you would understand, I hereby give my oath of allegiance to this alim. Now that doesn't mean it can't be done. Some people give bay'ah to scholars with regards to ihsan, or bay'ah because they say, I want you to be my sheikh and to look out for me. And so the sheikh says, okay, based upon the bay'ah that you've given me, I will teach you what I know. Right? And that happens. So you have specific bay'ah and then general bay'ah. right? And that depends on the time and place and circumstances that govern it. But the scholar must have the obviously the authority to give it. So a scholar, if he's, you know, over the jurisdiction of Jordan, right, he doesn't then extend his jurisdiction over, say, California. His jurisdiction is Jordan, right? Unless he's Qadi al-Qada or the Sheikh al-Islam of his time, which his dominance extends over all those things, whether people know him or not. His dominance extends. Yes? Okay. Inshallah, what we'll do is we'll break from here. And inshallah, we hope to see you next week. We're going to start from 763 to 863. And a lot will happen in that time. So please keep us in your du'as, inshallah. We will see you next week. Assalamu alaikum. Allah. Alhamdulillah. Salatu wassalam ala rasulillah. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك اشهد ان لا اله الا انت